Welcome to episode 27 of Anglican Unscripted. This is a show where two people talk about football. Now, who's your pick? Manchester United or I guess we don't talk about football. This is where two people talk about Anglican things. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today's February 6th, 2012.
George, we're going to cover today in history. A lot of people would think the biggest struggles in our church history have been just the conflict here between Rowan Williams and the rest of the church, or the short history of Anglicanism. But the longest going tragic thing we've had going on is the struggle between Palestine and Israel. We're going on 15,000 years of war, battle, hurt feelings, and a kind of a conflict between Islam and early Judaism and Christianity. However, this finds itself interesting because we have the presiding bishop of the United States, decided to weigh in on this 3 years ago today. Why would you want to talk about this?
Well, as you know, when the presiding bishop makes a pronouncement, that settles the issue. And so on February 6, 2009, when she told the Israelis to cut it out, as you've noticed, peace broke out immediately in the Middle East.
Yes.
The Iranians disarmed. Hamas stopped lobbing shells into Israel. The Israelis released tens of thousands of political prisoners and opened their doors to the return of Arabs expelled in the 40s. The Episcopal Church comes up with these statements that I'm sure are well-meaning, but are absolutely useless in the greater scheme of things.
Well, there was a time when it was important that the Episcopal Church and other leaders say things because their words had power. Right now, when the Episcopal Church talks, nobody's listening.
Well, they didn't say anything at the Civil War, and since then, no one's paid any attention. The Episcopal Church during the American Civil War said, well, we'll decide once the war's over what we're going to do. Fair enough, but
sure.
And maybe they could have said something that would influence decision. What are we going to do about the Kaiser? But for the last 20, 30 years, ever since the Vietnam era and the Civil Rights era, when the church became radicalized in some sense, when it became culturally acceptable for the church to comment on social issues, especially during the Civil Rights era, the church hasn't learned when to shut up. No. So we've now reached a situation where Walter Russell Mead, who was a very, very prominent political foreign affairs columnist last year in February, took the Episcopal Church to task, basically saying, you people are ridiculous. No more resolutions from General Convention saying free Mamu Abubia Jamal, or whatever. No more comments about Palestine. No more things about issues that you have no involvement with. Stick to what you do. But the problem is the Episcopal Church, for many of its bishops, they don't do anything but social gospel, social justice.
Well, and that's the problem, is they don't know that they have to clean their own house before they can, I guess, and I hate to use the splinter eye thing, but, they're commenting on things they have no idea about. They certainly haven't researched the history of the conflict, and they're just putting their foot in their mouths because they have more internal conflict in their church and division sometimes than you see between Palestine and Israel.
Well, do you remember the Jenin massacre in 2002? That was where...
the full massacre, yes.
Well, do you remember the controversy about the Jenin massacre?
Well, yeah.
Well, Palestinians said that the Israeli troops went into a town, Jenin, and used Arab men and women and children as human shields and shot civilians, and it was always a terrible, horrific massacre, so on and so forth. And the bishop in Jerusalem, Ria Abu al-Assal, Anglican bishop, went around telling terrible horror stories, relating first-person accounts of murder and mayhem and massacre. And later turned out none of it was true. It was a completely false story. But the Episcopal Church bought into that meme of Israel being abusive to the Arabs and just ran with it. And we didn't even get an, oh, never mind. We just started to the next outrage.
Sure. Well, it's waters they should not delve into because they're doing it for the social reasons. The problem with the Israel and the Palestine conflict obviously goes back 15 years, but the Palestinians want to know if they can form their own government and have self-determination. And they've been offered opportunities in the past, but because of Islamic forces and Muslim Brotherhood, they've never been able to take steps beyond the corruption that the money they've been getting causes. Mm-hmm. Israel's been sitting there saying, we don't really want a Palestine authority or identity or nation because you guys have always put in your documentation that we can't exist if you exist.
Well, there's something called a two-state solution that some politicians like to talk about, where there's a Palestinian state and an Israeli state side by side in the region, and life and happiness goes on. There is already a two-state solution, and the Palestinian state's called Jordan. Most of the people who live in Jordan are Palestinians.
Yeah.
I think if you want my commentary button to flash, my 2 cents, turn over the West Bank to Palestine and let them sort it out.
George, episode 27 is going to be another groundbreaking episode because we get to announce breaking news that nobody else knows or wants to know or needs to know. They all need to know this. The next Bishop of Central Florida is going to be Greg Brewer.
Yes, on Thursday, the Standing Committee in the Diocese announced that the necessary number of consents from sitting bishops and standing committees had been received. That's unofficial because 815 has to make sure there are no forged signatures.
Sure.
But Greg Brewer can go ahead and start planning his consecration on March 24th as the 4th Bishop of Central Florida.
Okay. So this leads to a lot of questions because in all intents and purposes, Greg Brewer is a conservative, evangelical, charismatic priest, now bishop, in the Episcopal Church. How did we have another conservative Episcopal bishop elected after all the Mark Lawrence stuff went on?
Because the principal unit of the Episcopal Church is the diocese. Mm-hmm. The diocese, as Archbishop Rowan Williams says, is the theological, ecclesial, organizational unit under which our church operates in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, remember earlier this year, the National Church released statistics. It released how the church is declining, how many people give so much. One of the numbers they released, and it's held steady ever since I've been reporting this for the last 12 years, is the breakdown of where people stand on the issues. And the left and the right are equal sized in the Episcopal Church. So the people in the pews basically represent the people in America, roughly half liberal, half conservative. The problem is that the national leadership as a whole is uniformly left-wing. But the national leadership doesn't matter. It's a talking shop that has really no authority. It can't tax. It can only spend the money that they've inherited from previous generations, and it can't really do anything to change the facts on the ground, other than to embarrass people.
And I'd say another thing is timing. When Mark Lawrence was consecrated or elected Bishop of South Carolina twice, was a different time frame in Episcopal Anglican history. We were going through this whole revolution of what to do about then Pittsburgh Bishop Duncan, what to do about all this stuff going on with GAFCON and all these different areas in the church where things were struggling, and they knew there was a fracture coming and happening. Mm-hmm. And they thought for sure Mark Lawrence would be a part of that fracture and take a whole diocese out of the Episcopal Church, much like San Joaquin, Quincy, Fort Worth, and other dioceses have done. What we find here is that Mark Lawrence did none of those things that he was predicted to do. He did what he said he was going to do, And because of Mark Lawrence's witness or testimony or what he's done, I think it opened up the ground for Greg Brewer to be elected.
Yes, and there'll be an election this next few months in western Louisiana, where they too will replace Bruce McPherson, a great fellow, a great solid bishop, a defender of the faith, and it's very likely that they'll replace him with somebody just as solid, just as strong. The Episcopal Church is collapsing in some parts of the country. That's true. Numbers are falling, attendance is falling, everything is falling apart. In other places, it's doing very well, thank you.
Yeah, the only numbers that are going up is the average age in the congregation. Everything else seems to be falling precipitously. And it's going to be interesting over the long time to see if this is going to be an opportunity for conservatives to retake the Episcopal Church diocese by diocese. The initial ground war by the liberals was to take over the seminaries and take over lay leadership in the Episcopal areas of the church, and they did a great job. Wow, good job. But can we now retake the Episcopal Church?
I don't like to use that analogy of retaking the Episcopal Church for two reasons. One, because it gives a sense that there's something to retake.
Sure.
The national institution of the Episcopal Church is a recent creation. It's always been the diocese that matter, but in the 20th century, they tried to centralize things in New York. But they didn't change the Constitution and canons, so they put a huge bureaucracy in New York, spending a great deal of money, but it doesn't do anything. Now, with the money falling down and everything sort of contracting, that operation in New York is going to be shown up for being the useless entity that it is. It's still the diocese that matters, and each diocese has its own unique character. And some dioceses will continue going out into la-la land. Other dioceses will continue to be strong and faithful and grow in the Lord.
I think that's an important point. That it's the contraction's happening despite any retaking at all. This contraction's happening because of financial issues, population issues, and the census of the church. Not just the polity, because of the growing and aging congregations.
The other thing I have, and there are other issues that we need to address too. For instance, you can look at what is the relationship between the number of children with two parents in their family nationally, and look at the statistics of the Episcopal Church's decline against that. I mean, you can say, oh, it's liberalism that's caused us to go into the tank. Oh, it's the fact that now a majority of children only have one parent at home, or something like that. Or people are cohabiting rather than marrying. The changing culture is also affecting Orthodox churches as well as the liberal churches. But when I say retaking, I don't like that language. It's because at deep down, God is in charge. When the Holy Spirit will not let us down. In other words, we must trust in God and allow His work to be done. It may be that it's time to cry Ichabod at the Episcopal Church. I don't know. But I do know in that the places where I've worshiped, where I worked, and the people I know, the power of the Spirit is alive and moving, and the church is dynamic and growing in power and strength and holiness.
Sure.
And what's wrong with that?
So, breaking news is going to be a future Bishop Greg Brewer, Central Florida. George, I hope you're paying attention. We're going to do an EMEA story. Actually, we're going to do a correction to a EMEA story. Last week, we talked about the Anglican ordinary. Boy, my language skills are just incredible. People have been saying, I can't wait to hear Kevin pronounce another incredibly complicated African word. But you get to do the pronunciations in the next story here. But we reported that Collini had done consecrations at the Winter Conference in Houston under the province of Congo, where he used to be the Archbishop. That was incorrect. What's the correct story as we know it now?
The consecrations of 4 deacons and a priest were under the authority of Archbishop Collini, but were done, meaning the hands were laid upon the 4 people, 4 deacons and 1 priest, by Bishop Sandy Green of the AMIA. And according to reporter Sherry Wetzel from Anglicans United, the man who gave the authority for Sandy Green and Emmanuel Kalini to do this act was Bishop William Bahumeku Mugunenyi. I won't say that again, but he's the Bishop of Boga in the Congo. That's who was listed on the program. Now, we've since followed up, and I haven't heard back yet from the Archbishop of the Congo about this, but the Congo is quite clear, and this aspect of the story has not changed. The Congo has not been in discussions with the AMIA and will not be picking up the AMIA because they're going to be signing on to the Windsor Report and the Covenant.
Yeah, it's interesting. As most people know, the EMEA is still looking for a province to take them on, and I'm sure there's some canonical thing they were able to do here. It's just an interesting story because our correction didn't come from EMEA. We got the correction from Sherry Wetzel officially, and that's interesting.
But I think we should. I think the wording is important. It's not a correction; it's a clarification.
Sure.
The clarificate in our written report, we stated that Emmanuel Kalini did this when someone did it on Kalini's authority, and the person who did it was Sandy Green. The act itself was done, and the act was not given the sanction of the province of the Congo. That hasn't changed.
Not yet. All right, George, let's do some more international news. We're going to talk about Nigeria and its cast of characters. And one of the problems it's having right now is it's may just be a couple years from civil war. They have the trouble with the Islamic fundamentalists in the north. They have trouble with the Christians in the south. And it's kind of a paradox and a repeat of what happened in Sudan just last year, where the North and South Sudan had to separate and become two separate countries. Who are the cast of characters that are speaking up against this?
Well, in many ways, it's like the Sudan: North Muslim, South Christian. South is where all the oil is. There's no oil in northern Nigeria. Army from the north in both countries. Nigeria is half Christian, half Muslim, roughly speaking. And the north is majority Muslim, the south is majority Christian. As there's been migration back and forth, there are Muslims in the south and Christians in the north. In the north, there's a terrorist group, Boko Haram, it's linked to Al-Qaeda, who has begun killing Christians, saying Christians must leave northern Nigeria, we're going to turn Nigeria into a Sharia state. And last week, there was a bombing that killed 200 people. There were bombings on Christmas Day services at a church. It's just it's on the cusp of a full-blown religious war. And it's also an ethnic war. A lot of the Christians in the north are immigrants from the south, from the Igbo region in the southeast. And the Igbo people are being singled out and murdered in the north for being Igbos and for being Christians. And there are Igbo leaders who are saying, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You kill us, we'll kill you. One of those people is Emmanuel Chukwuma, who's an Anglican bishop.
Who's been quite a character over the last several years in the church. I remember a video feed from him at a certain Lambeth conference where he tried to excise the demon of homosexuality from a gay activist.
Yeah, and I'm afraid it didn't work. The man remains gay, but he's a bit of a showman. He did this for the BBC. And against people like Bishop Emmanuel Chukwuma, who's calling to meet force with force.
Sure, yes.
Archbishop Akinola, Peter Akinola, the former archbishop, and Archbishop Nicholas Oko, the current archbishop, are saying, meet murder with love, meet violence with peace.
Which, in that region, is a very difficult message to hear because here in the Western society, we have houses of families of 2 and 4 or 5 in our families. They're the community is their family. Brothers and sisters are all living around them, parents, and your family is 8, 10, 12, 20, 30, 40 in your family that you just arrived back from a visit to where you had a job, and they're all dead. They were murdered. Little difficulty in hearing that message meet these murders with love.
Yes, but the Church of Nigeria is very strongly against any schism, any split of the country into different groups.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the reasons is because they value the republic, the federal republic, and also they know that if the Christians minority in the north gets separated from their brothers in the south, it's going to get really bad.
And their current problems aren't just the religion wars. They happen all over Africa, but they also have what we call a gas war or a oil war. Nigeria is very rich in oil.
One of the largest petroleum producers in the world.
Sure, but they contract that oil out to Europe and other places, and they don't keep a lot for themselves, and they don't have a refinery.
Right. They have, I think, 4 refineries to make gasoline, but they probably need 30 to meet demand. So even though they ship all this oil out, they've got to import gasoline, and the government subsidizes it, or it did until the beginning of this year.
Right.
And the government couldn't afford to do that, so they took off the price cap. Price went up 4 or 5-fold and had a nationwide national strike for a week because the electrical grid in Nigeria, here where we take things for granted here, the plumbing works, you flip a switch, the electricity goes on. It doesn't work that way in Nigeria. It may work today, it may not. So if you need a refrigerator to run, you have a generator and you run it on diesel fuel. And you've got to buy it, and now the cost of running your diesel generator is just jumped 3-4-fold.
Absolutely.
And if you're up to here financially right now, you're now underwater with the price of diesel going up through the roof.
Yeah, and
you studied theology in northern Nigeria, understand? And in the 70s. Today, it seems that the northern half of your country is governed by Sharia law. Do you feel, how do you attribute the change with about the intolerance from the 70s until today? Because there seems to be a resurgence of violence in Nigeria against Christians. What would be the cause of that? Or did it exist? Did you feel at that time that when you were studying that you were like an island in the middle of Islam?
I'm from the north myself. I was born in the north. I lived my parents' everything in the north. The kind of violence we're seeing now is new. Christians and Muslims have lived side by side for years. And we went to school together, we ate together, and did things together. But we knew too that politically, in the north, even though you are from the northern region, there were certain things you just couldn't get in some parts of the north. That was there, as old as my parents. But we could make do and find our ways. And it helped us because then we didn't get anything easy. So you had to excel. You had to prove yourself in public and private service. And we were ready for that. But the new wave must have come in just soon after my ordination because I was posted to Zaria. And just that year alone, there was a campaign of Islam only. That was just after Ayatollah Khomeini and his success in Iran. Mm-hmm. And may I say that there were also some Nigerian students who were there and had come back. So it was a military regime that didn't know what to do with that and didn't bother. And for the number of years that the military were in power, it didn't show because they were still on the ground, gaining ground, gaining ground, and gaining ground, and gaining ground. But we in the ministry were encountering them on a daily basis. But we were not getting help, and nobody was listening to us until in the civilian era, they got the opportunity to now show up who they really are. And because it's not something that government has learned how to deal with, they themselves are confused. And we who have lived with it, they do not think that we know how to advise them on how to deal with it. They're not people we don't know. Phone calls and all that, we know each other. We differ. But let me quickly say too that one of my points here is in my paper that I do not think it's particularly very relevant, except for your question, is that do not think of northern Nigeria, think of America. Because in your own case, you're going to be faced with two deadly diseases. Firstly, the fracture of the church that also was not useful to Augustine in his time in North Africa, including the persecution that is coming. So when you have those two together, the church does not have a quick answer. So whereas in the north of Nigeria, I was just speaking with the Bishop of Gombe today, and he had just attended a funeral of those who were killed in the church in Gombe. And I said, brother, how are you? He said, brother, our faith is strong. Now, I don't know how many bishops can answer that for their people. He's not leaving, he's there. I tried to get in touch with the Bishop of Kano yesterday. He texted me back, and he just said prayers. So one of the things that this has done for us is that we're not taking opportunities lightly. Every opportunity for me is a sense of urgency. It's not a good thing. We don't like it, but what can we do? As I say this, I remember people in Kashmir, in Pakistan, in Sudan, in Iraq. So, but think for yourselves, too. Good question.
Welcome my great friend Alan Haley back to Anglican Unscripted episode 27, and we're going to have what we call a tech learning legal moment.
Okay.
We should create a name for this, tech legal news or a tech moment, because we've had a bit of news in the last 7 days, most specifically bad press news for the Episcopal Church, yet very egregious legal maneuvers. And let's start first with Virginia.
Okay. Yeah, in Virginia, it all revolved around Bishop Johnston made this statement to Diocesan Council. He was reaching out to the Cana congregations and was trying to work out arrangements whereby perhaps they could stay in their buildings. And it looked like all was, peace and olive branches. And then comes the word that attorneys have filed for prejudgment interest in the Fairfax County Court, Judge Randy Bellows. And what this is, prejudgment interest is what is awarded on an amount of money that is clearly and certainly owed before there's a judgment for that amount of money. And so, for example, if you agree to paint my house for $10,000 and you do the work and I don't pay you and you have to file suit and it goes on for a year or more and finally you get your judgment for $10,000, the court is empowered in that case to tack on interest from the date that I should have paid you up to the date of the judgment to equalize the fact that you didn't have the use of the money all that time.
Well, in that case, they know the start date of when the interest should start.
Exactly.
Where's the start date for the interest in the Virginia cases?
That's exactly the problem here. For the first 3 years of the case that began in 2006, the first 3 years, it was all in Cana's favor. There was no, the first decision by Judge Bellows was in favor of the Cana congregations, and that had to be appealed up to the Virginia Supreme Court. So it wasn't until 2010 when the Supreme Court handed down its decision reversing Judge Bellows and sending it back for another trial that there was even any possibility that the Diocese of Virginia could lay claim to these funds. So it's a little overreaching, in my opinion, to reach back to 2006, 2007 and say, well, those amounts in the bank accounts, when we filed our declaratory actions in January 2007, from that date forward, you should have handed them over to us. And we've been deprived of the loss of interest on that money all that time. It just doesn't really fit the mold of the classical prejudgment interest, and I think it's a move that is intended to intimidate and to annoy and harass rather than simply, create something that I'd be very surprised if Judge Bellows grants the request as it's been made. Anyway, it completely undercuts Bishop Johnston's attempt to reach out to the Cana congregations and just confirms what you holds out with one hand an olive branch and the other hand it's a iron fist and a velvet glove that just comes at you.
Well, these lawyers would not have done this without his okay.
Absolutely.
Right,
And
so-
they have not withdrawn their motion. In fact, they tried to get it heard on an expedited basis. They're supposed to be working out the terms of a final judgment there, and it was due to Judge Bellows, I think, by February 12th. They filed a motion to expedite the hearing of this prejudgment interest motion before the judgment would get resolved. So I'm just puzzled by the tactics, because it's not the kind of thing that you do if you're really sincerely trying to work things out.
Well, the analogy I always use is, let's go for a David and Goliath analogy here. Here Goliath won, and Goliath has decided to dismember and boil in acid the remains of David. I mean, it's a sad structure of how tech is taking on the results of their legal victory. They won.
Yeah.
But you don't have to really go and really give yourself this much bad press. But this is another learning moment of, are we dealing with Christians here? Well, the evidence doesn't show that.
Well, there are thousands and thousands of people in these Cana congregations, some very well-to-do, some of Virginia's finest, and to alienate them in this way, to make them see just what really, it confirms them in their decision to have decided to leave the diocese in the first place.
Yeah.
It just strengthens their resolve and makes it that much harder to bring the factions, if they ever could, back together. And so it's a burning bridges kind of thing. As you say, it's making things impossible to go back. And I can't. It's not a Christian sentiment. It's not a Christian way of acting. So I don't know where they're coming from in this.
Now, usually we only have one story a week about hungry, money-grabbing jury things. We're going to have a jurisprudence talking about another case in Savannah, Georgia, where they're trying to clamber and get all the money as well. The decision came down in December that says the property belongs to the Episcopal Diocese of Georgia, and that you need to move over and...
The congregation left the church. This is the oldest church in Georgia, the mother church. And so they left, and the premises left everything there, all the prayer books and everything, and turned it all over. The only thing it didn't hand over was the endowment account and certain, I guess, of the bank accounts, the website and the name.
Right. They have 90 days legally to take this to the next level, which would be, they'd have to go first to the Supreme Court of Georgia, which they're not going to get much, and then move on to...
They did, that was the...
Oh, I'm sorry. Now they have to go to the Supreme Court.
They have to go to the United States Supreme Court now.
You can't go there without money.
Yeah, they have 90 days to decide to file their petition. And, the problem is, if they turned over everything now to the Diocese of Georgia, filed their petition, waited to see, and if the U.S. Supreme Court accepts the petition, then we're more than a year away from any eventual decision in the case and resolution of it. So if sometime in 2013 the Supreme Court hands down its decision reversing the Georgia court, then the money's gone. It's been handed over to the diocese and probably used by it to meet expenses in the meantime. And the diocese, because it's having to spend the money, probably won't be good for the return of it. So that's the problem, the quandary they face until they know whether the Supreme Court will act on their request.
Well, I know that sometimes in legal issues you can have set up an escrow and stuff like that. What's the solution here?
Well, the solution here would be to try to get a stay pending appeal. And they could ask the Georgia Supreme Court for that in the first instance. They would have to promise, of course, not to touch the endowment funds, which it should not be a problem, pending the appeal and decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. And if the Georgia Supreme Court turns them down on that request, then they can go to the justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, who has jurisdiction over that part of the, I believe it's the Fourth or the Fifth Circuit. And I'm not sure which justice, as I sit here now, is that person, but they would make application to that justice in chambers, and he would consider the papers, or she would consider the papers, and decide whether to grant the stay. And so that would be an initial first sign of whether the Supreme Court's, even interested in considering this decision or not. But as I say, that together, we know that the Timberidge Court, the Presbyterian, rather, in Atlanta, is going to appeal their decision that was against them by the Georgia Supreme Court. They've already announced that, and they've got their appeal underway. So we would have two cases coming up from Georgia at the same time, which would be a stronger way of presenting the issues to the U.S. Supreme Court.
We discussed the Savannah case before, and we discussed how one of the problems was there were Episcopal judges and Presbyterian judges that were deciding this.
Yes.
And now it's not limited to just Georgia. We now have a new case in Milwaukee. Well, not really new, but a stranger case in Milwaukee where an Episcopal judge has, once again done the David and Goliath thing. Goliath has won and has just decimated a fruitful congregation in their ministries.
Yeah, we're talking about Waukesha here, a small little church out in the rural parts of Wisconsin that St. Edmunds, and they went to trial in December, or actually they were pre-trial because the judge was deciding motions in limine, and then out of the blue he simply says, I'm going to grant an injunction right now. You people have to be out of this church in 24 hours.
And this is a week before Christmas.
Yeah.
I know because my family and I were driving to Madison for Christmas with my parents, and as I'm crossing the Illinois-Wisconsin border without my camera for Anglican TV, I left it at home, I hear this great news, not great news, this news I should cover the story and get an interview with the priest, but no.
Yeah, my wife's family is from Waukesha too, and I've been back there. I've been to Neshota House,
Sure.
and all of that wonderful country, and I've gone by this little church. It's as I say, it's just extraordinary that he would so proceed. And they also operated, as I understand it, a school for autistic children and blind children. And they've been forced out of those premises, have no means currently of continuing that service, and it's been a tragedy all around. Then Bishop Miller of the Diocese of Milwaukee has no one to fill the church. There's no remnant congregation. They unanimously decided to leave. There's no one who wants to stay in the Episcopal Church and worship there. So he summoned people from all his other parishes to say, let's hold a service there to celebrate the new start of a new congregation. And then he closed down a parish about 15 miles away and said, well, now you have a new place you can go and worship 15 miles away. So that's the Episcopal Church welcomes you. The Episcopal Church knows just your best interests and knows exactly how to proceed and doesn't care a whit about the terrible, terrible publicity it's receiving. This was
it's interesting because we just learned this week, last year the court case in Canada,
Right.
The Supreme Court threw the churches out of the Vancouver area out on the ears to go find a different place to worship. And we go and we look at the people who are worshiping there now, and there's 13 people worshiping in the Vancouver church.
Vancouver Church, yeah. And I don't know if you saw that, again, bad publicity the Episcopal Church got with that poster that it promulgated last week, and maybe you could put it up for the benefit of Anglican TV.
Sure.
Yeah. It said the Episcopal Church fighting fundamentalism since 1784. And fundamentalist movement didn't start until 1915 with the publishing of
That's right. Yeah.
series of books on fundamental principles. And so, yeah, right, that's the Episcopal Church for you. Always fighting the battles that it shouldn't take on and coming out the worst for it in the public eye. And I don't know, if it keeps blackening itself this way, then it's doing we don't have to do a thing as Anglicans. We just have to separate ourselves. I'm an Episcopalian, and I watch this going on, and I'm just totally dismayed, totally, utterly dismayed. And it has to change. It may get worse before it gets better. My little church, fortunately, is very Orthodox, and we carry on the faith that just the way you would in one of your Anglican churches. So
Sure.
it's
Well, I travel the breadth of this country a lot and visit lots of Episcopal churches, and there are so many faithful Episcopal churches that either have no connection with their bishop or are protected by an Orthodox bishop.
right.
And that's why these congregations still survive, but these congregations the median age is well over 45 or 50.
Right.
And that's the difficulty is that it's not sustainable over time.
That's the other factor in Milwaukee I forgot. Yeah, that's right. And the Bishop Miller sued not only the parish, but he sued the individual members of the vestry and the congregation and said, if you try to appeal, we're going to press these individual suits, and those people are in their 70s and 80s, and facing the individual suit for damages and everything like that. It was just the most heavy-handed tactic I've read about so far of the Episcopal Church, and shame on you, Bishop Miller, shame on you.
Absolutely. You and I talked off camera about, Obama's bad press this last week because of his tactics. Well, he's like, well, sure he can do it. Why can't I do it? Well, it doesn't. She has a different thing going.
Yeah, and he's taken on the whole Catholic Church, and wow, I can't imagine a dumber move in an election year.
No, so we'll just see how that one goes over. But it's interesting, for you and I, it's job security, but we don't want to see this in a Christian witness. This is the most horrible witness.
So I smile and try to be, light about it. It's not. It's terrible. Mm-hmm. It's serious, and it's ongoing, and it needs to change. It's just not Christian, and we're seeing behavior that, as I say, reflects so poorly on the Episcopal Church and on our politicians now that everybody's getting fed up with it.
Yeah. All right, this brings us to the end of episode 27, and this is the point in our show that we always ask for feedback, and I want to thank you for all the feedback we got last week. Bishops, clergy, lay people all wrote us and thank you for the reporting we did, and helped us further the stories we did this week. Even allowed for us to make a correction or a clarification on the EMEA story. These are the important parts of feedback. George and I can't just do what we do here in the void of what we read on the internet and hear from people and report it. We need to have follow-up on our stories to really allow for a general cohesiveness that what we're doing is correct, honest, honorable, and keeps the confidence of the viewer, in check.
And godly. Mm-hmm. Kevin and I are men under an oath of obedience, and that's an obedience to God and obedience to the truth. As much as I'd like to be right in every single circumstance, that's not why we're here. We're here to share the truth as we discover it through our journalistic work and to talk about things, but we're not here for ourselves. We serve the Lord, we serve the church, and we serve truth. And we need your backup, your feedback, your support, and your prayers to continue to do this work, which is a ministry.
Sure. One of the things, George and I are taking our Saturday afternoon out. You see this show on Monday morning or Monday afternoon or Monday evening, but we take our Saturday out, a 2-hour block here. We do an hour show prep and an hour of the show, and you're not going to see because it's edited out, but right above George's head there's been this plane flying around with a copper tone banner, and because I'm a great editor, you'll never hear the plane or see the the copper tone thing, but I just wanted to emphasize that we take time out of our week, almost 4 or 5 hours, to put the show together. And it's a lot of effort, and we thank you for your feedback in that. And, we love what we do, and we love that you love what we do. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. My dad used to have, I should get it from him. He had an old ticker tape machine, like a stock market thing. Like the teletype.
Yeah.
It's like the typewriters going in the background. We should have
that. I have that sound effect with my Final Cut Pro. I'll add it on.
Yeah,
that sounds cool.
And breaking news. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, Walter Cronkite used to have that in the background of the intro to CBS News.
Yeah.
Breaking news today, J.F. Kennedy is having another affair. No, they never reported that stuff. Oh, well.
Did you hear papers or something?
What's that?
Did you hear papers wrestling?
Yeah, we do our stuff. What?
Did you hear papers wrestling?
Yeah, it's okay. We're hearing airplanes flying over George. He's next to Vero Beach International Airport, so the copper tone plane
Kevin,
keeps coming by.
You have to realize everything in Vero Beach is next to each other. I mean, we're not talking about a major metropolitan area.
No, that's true.
I mean, we've got the stoplight, we got the airport, we got the bus station, and We have a fill-in station or two.
Well, that's good. Yeah, we have 2 Dunkin' Donuts in a church.
Two
And-
Dunkin' Donuts. Well, that's
Yeah,
one more
there's
than we do.
It's one northbound, one southbound. So they catch everybody. They caught me twice.